Dawak, a planet seemingly like many others scattered around the vast, never-ending darkness of space, where the life managed to sprout, grow and evolve, turning into one of the countless civilizations sprinkled between the stars. This one in particular was, in many aspects, similar to Earth, atmosphere-wise, mineral-wise. They seemed like a sister planet to our own. Currently, they were an industrial civilization with people usually being careful and respectful of the nature and environment around them, almost as if they tried to live in a symbiosis with it, instead of chopping it down and reducing the greenery for their own benefits. One could wonder why did our civilization didn't do something like this. But alas, this frankly peaceful life couldn't go on forever. Few years ago, a company going by the name of Pol Lution started a business on Dawak, what initially didn't seem as too bad of an idea, as the company was building and running power plants. People quickly realized that they produce excessive amounts of toxic wastes and smoke that slowly withers and kills the green environment around them. Not only that, but the effects on the general public aren't good either. The sun was setting down on Dawak, another day living in place that was becoming even more barren and alien. People were stuck in a traffic jam, where usually was happiness and peace, now was sadness, exhaustion and weakness. The company was drying off both the land and the people, without a care for either of them. An elderly woman by the name of Mar was standing on a balcony and talking to the CEO of Pol Lution Company, who named his company after his own first, Pol, and family, Lution, name. Mar was furious. She tried to reason with the greedy, heartless CEO, saying that the company and buildings run by them produce way too much toxic smoke to be acceptable. It was her city and people were getting more sick by the day from the poisonous air, and the trees are dying at an even more alarming rate, unable to filter that much waste. The state of nature was getting increasingly worse, the once bustling greenery and serenity replaced by the barren grayness, lack of leaves on trees, branches decorating the city floors. Mar said that both the city and people are far from a healthy state and he needs to stop. However, Pol smugly explained that the contract was valid for at least another 10 years, so there's pretty much nothing they can do about it. With an evil grin, he ended the call, leaving Mar angry and desperate to save her dying city. She just wanted to serve the city well, to see it live and prosper with nature hand in hand, but now she was devastated, feeling that the path to ruin is her own fault since she had the decisive power to strike the deal with Pol. A deal, which on its own looked promising, but she failed to see what it would bring in the long run. Somewhere at the other end of the city, in one of the many alleyways adorning the metropolis, there was a boy who's been an art student, but has always been looked down on by his peers and with some weird mixture of compassion and confusion by the professors. He was curled up on the ground, with a group of bullies, students from his own class, attacking him both physically and mentally. Why was that? His art wasn't bad by any means, no, but it was considered strange and childish by many of those around him. Other than the assignments, he was pretty much always drawing what he called size art, kaijus, giant animals, massive women towering over cities and planets. Despite all the bullying, he wasn't stopping as he loved doing this, but he quietly hoped for someone to, one day, understand his burning flame of passion for this stuff. The bullies torn open his bag of artworks and began laughing. Tearing some of the apart, stomping over them, slowly burning them before his very eyes, they kept calling out, "Aw, look, our bug boy's dream is burning, should I keep stomping on you? I mean, I'm sure it makes you feel as small and worthless as you would be, giant women and animals. Absurd, why don't you focus on something better?" All while kicking, stomping, trampling and spitting on the boy. He was shedding tears, but wasn't calling for help. It wasn't the first time it happened and never really came to his aid since the city began dying to pollution, as the times were looking more hopeless and desperate. A mysterious portal opened and something, or rather, someone, rolled through it before standing up and dusting herself off with hands on her hips. Towering woman of a height of 160 meters tall was now standing in the middle of the city and looking around. Ryung, as she was called, was pretty sure she found herself in a right place. Having confirmed that, the somber atmosphere of the city, the dying nature, the barren almost colorless environment and multiple toxic fumes going up into the air from many facilities. Ryung grinned and stretched out before her rampage. She began walking around the city, crushing buildings big and small, flattening streets and alleyways, striking fear in the hearts of the citizens. As she was taking slow steps across the cityscape, she playfully kept mocking the people below. "Oh, you don't want to be crushed? Then getting out of my way is the best you can do." However, most of the areas were too crowded for people to effectively avoid her. Terrifying as it was, it sent a strange surge of revitalization through the city, through the people. It was clear that it's not that they don't want to live, it's that they don't want to live like that, in these conditions, and absolutely no care for their well-being. In the alleyway, the bullied art student was starstruck, and it couldn't have been his own imagination, as everyone seemed to see the very same thing. His amazement was in stark contrast to the bullies, who were absolutely terrified and panicked. They tried to run away, to escape the incoming giantess, but Ryung's rampage blocked the only way out with debris, crashed buses, cars and building rubble, all of which created a high, burning wall. On one hand, it was their fault for choosing an alley with only one way in and out, but then again, who expects a 160-meter-tall giantess to suddenly appear in their city and wreak absolute havoc? They observed the giantess moving away and then circling back, flattening the city on the way through. Ryung took her sweet time with her carnage. She turned around and was on another stroll when her eyes locked on the few entrapped people between yet uncrushed buildings, crushing countless people with every step, silencing the panic with the sheer might of her soles. She approached incredibly close to them. As she did, the people below kept poking, pushing and forcing one of them in her direction before backing off completely, screaming at the top of their lungs that she should crush him instead of them, his existence for their safety. Ryung realized what's going on. A group of cowards teaming up on someone and trying to save their sorry butts when things don't go as expected. She crouched down and with utmost care and gentleness picked up the student onto the open palm of her hand before standing up and enveloping the cowardly bullies in the shadow of her dirt-stained soul, to which many people were already stuck. With hearable anger and disgust in her voice, she spoke to them. "I'm going to have so great of a time crushing you all. So humiliating, painful, being pressed into the cold, hard ground by someone's foot without being able to do anything. It's almost pitiful." Ryung lowered her foot, stepping on the group slowly, feeling them wriggle, fight and squirm beneath the weight and heat of her soul. They were pressed against the ground and the soul for a while until Ryung raised her foot and smirked. "Goodbye." With this singular word, she crashed her foot back down with full force and impact, grinding the sole a little and causing the group to be pressed quite deep into one of her footprints. They weren't dead, but with the amount of pain they were feeling combined with surrounding steamy heat, they kinda wished they were leaving them. She turned to the art student. "Are you all right?" she asked calmly. He was in awe, unable to speak. He could only stand frozen in place, look up at Ryung's looming, pretty face, and shyly nod to the question. "Good, I hope you don't hold it against me. I know it may not look like it, but it's all with the intent of possibly improving the situation here," she explained. The art student shook his head. I don't. Thank you," he said cheerfully. Relieved, Ryung gently placed him on the rooftop and waved to him, wanting to continue her mission. He waved back slowly, trying to remember the last few minutes as clearly as he could to one day paint a picture of that scene, but something like that won't be easily forgotten. He observed the giantess moving deeper into the city, with destruction following in her wake. At the same time, in the Mars office, she was in absolute distress. First the failed attempt of negotiating with Pol Lution, and now her city was under attack by a massive woman crushing everything in her way. Everything that could go wrong has gone wrong, and this day couldn't possibly get any worse. Furious, she called the police commissioner with an order to send out all units to stop the giantess immediately. She did not care how much gear goes towards it. They were paid to protect the city, and now it was under threat bigger than anything they've known. They couldn't do anything against Pol Lution for legal reasons, but stopping her lies in their jurisdiction fully. Not wanting to have bad relations with the Mar, the commissioner sent out the troops even though he had a feeling this is hopeless. And he wasn't wrong. Outside, the police has gathered on the street, creating many roadblocks with cars and hiding behind them, firing at the incoming giantess, but, to their frankly expected result, their weapons and bullets were doing nothing to the tedious walking among them. It was like trying to hurt a bulletproof car with a pea shooter, even though they were terrified. Orders are orders, and in this city, a vast majority preferred to perish in action than survive with a brand of a coward who left their friends to die. Ryung was walking through the barricades with pretty much no effort, reducing cars to a scrap of worthless metal and causing some of the officers to get stuck to her soles while others were trapped in the footprints with minimal injuries, much to their surprise. Of course, their entire gear and weaponry would need replacement. But it seems they're going to live to see another day. Ryung finally approached two of the Pol Lution factories that were close to one another, that indeed boosted the output of the power plants, but at the same time increased the production of fumes by a huge margin. When the smoke reached her nostrils, she coughed out a little. No wonder people and the city were looking so bleak if that's being constantly pumped into the breathable air. With few precise and powerful stomps, she flattened one power plant with pretty much no side effects, no explosion or leakage. The compression and destruction was delivered so swiftly that the entire system collapsed before it could even signal the alarm. By the time other power plant was ready to do it, Ryung's foot was already coming down for it. Mar observed from her office as the giantess destroys the Pol Lution factories. That in and of itself didn't change her mind. It could be just that she wanted to destroy everything. However, what followed was simply astonishing. The giantess pointed her bracelet towards the destroyed power plants and shot a mysterious glowing projectile towards the rubble. Mar's eyes opened widely when the rubble and debris was replaced by beautiful, green plants and moss. It seemed as if this peculiar device was turning matter into greenery. She observed as the massive woman shot blast after blast onto the destroyed buildings, city districts and streets, slowly but surely turning the burning, ravaged city into beautiful areas bustling with nature. From her perspective, it kinda looked like green lungs for the city. A view that brought a tear to her eye as she yearned for a sight like this for years. It was then when Mar has realized that maybe the giantess wasn't here as a final nail in her coffin, but rather to give them a new chance. After all, it didn't seem like anyone is actually dying because of her, despite the unbelievable. What if it was fate? To start anew without the shackles of Pol Lution. If that was truly the case, Mar decided to meet her and quickly run downstairs, getting into the car and driving in the direction of the third and last power plant, as she assumed this would be her go-to location. She couldn't possibly know the giantess' intentions, but if there was a chance her gut feeling was right, she couldn't pass up on it. The traffic jam was garnered on the road leading out of the city, rather than the one towards it, as everyone tried to save themselves from the seemingly unending fury of the giantess. The Mar had pretty much a free street for herself, but she couldn't really go at full speed due to people running through on a regular basis. People in the jam were looking at Mar with a weird mixture of confusion, compassion and fear. Most of them thought she must be batshit insane to be heading straight towards something that even the entire police force couldn't stop. Luckily, she managed to find a path towards the final power plant without many issues. She parked and stepped out of the car, watching as the giantess comes ever closer. She was overwhelmed and terrified, but it was her city. She wanted to meet her even if it's the last thing she's going to do. Now, there wasn't much to do other than wait. In the meantime, Ryung was having quite some fun on her way to the final and pretty much largest Pol Lution factory. She was passing through some office buildings, smiling and happily waving to the people inside, either with her hands or feet, before destroying them to pieces. Punching from the top to the bottom, kicking the foundations and punching the falling rubble, grabbing the building and squeezing it tightly. If there's one thing someone could call Ryung's rampage, it definitely would be creative. People in the buildings were mortified. The buildings, concrete walls they trusted to be safe, were crumbling and tearing apart at their very eyes. Many lied on the floor, crouched beneath the desks or desperately tried to cling onto something as the whole office skyscraper falls to the ground. And yet, by a miracle or some unknown force keeping watch over them, they walked out from the rubble with minimal bruises and pain. The gratitude and relief didn't last long, as the looming shadow of a massive soul covered them, swiftly pressing them onto the harsh ground and causing them to stick on the surface of the sweaty foot. increasingly scary experience slowly turned into surprisingly calm and relatively relaxing experience as the giantess soul turned out to be much comfier and softer than they ever expected. Eventually, leaving a path of destruction in her wake, Ryung arrived at the third and final power plant and, well, she didn't even see the mar at her feet, casually stepping over her and many others, making them stuck to her massive soul among countless others. Mar tried getting Ryung's attention, but there wasn't much she can do when the shadow of the incoming soul surrounded her and the overwhelming force of it came down on her. But much to her surprise, despite seeing countless other situations like this since the giantess' arrival, she was alive. Stuck to the soul, but alive, stepped on time and time again as the giantess was taking care of the power plant. Despite crashing through the steel, concrete and other materials, she, as well as other incapacitated people, weren't feeling too much pain. Each step was more terrifying than the last, but upon realizing it's not harming her, Mar began thinking that the giantess soul is actually surprisingly comfy and cozy and started to love the feeling of being enveloped by her warm, slightly sweaty skin as she was nestled safely between the wrinkles. After a few minutes of slow and methodical rampage, Ryung has finally destroyed the last Pol Lution power plant, reducing their influence on the surrounding areas pretty much to zero. Upon turning the rubble into greenery, she searched for a cozy, peaceful place to sit down and talk with people both at her feet and those covering in the shadows, between the trees, in the yet not moss-covered footprints, noticing a moss-filled hill that was created upon firing a blaster into one of the districts. She took a few steps to stroll there. Sitting down on the soft seat, she breathed out a sigh of relief and took in the sights for a brief moment before taking a look at one of her soles by putting one leg over the other, which inadvertently put more pressure on the foot still on the ground, but it was hardly unpleasant, surrounded by softness from all sides, either by moss and greenery or the colossal soul itself. She smiled warmly upon them, and as soon as she was going to start speaking, Ryung noticed that one of the bullies from before and plucked him off, snipping him away. Though the landing could have been worse, it still was slightly painful as he fell straight through the branches and into some bushes. The giantess cleared her throat. Well, now, I think it's a bit too late, and from your perspective it may not look like I'm your friend, but my name is Ryung and I did what needed to be done so you all don't have to suffer from this corporation. I hope you don't hold it against me, she spoke calmly, tilting her head and playfully moving her foot. Among the many terrified and confused citizens was the Mar, who, by moving a little around, slowly turned to face the giantess with a smile, waving rapidly at her. She caught her attention. Welcome. I am Mar, the one in charge of this city, she said, sinking into the soul to prevent herself from falling. Was that all the reason though? Ryung cut in, confused a little. Mar. Don't you mean the mayor? To which the tiny shook her head. No, I mean yes, Yes, I am the mayor of this city, but Mar is my name. It sounds similar to the position, I agree, but ain't much I can do about it. Mar smiled and continued, when I've seen you're somehow keeping all of these people alive, I just had to meet you, to talk with you, maybe convince you to stop the destruction. But alas, though surprised to admit it, she was pretty intoxicated by the warmth of the soul and scent emanating from it even after the destruction. The pressure she suffered was a bit humiliating, considering her position in the city, but at the same time undeniably comfortable. She sighed before continuing. Thank you for everything and sorry for sending police your way. If I knew you mean to help, the Mar sighed, resting her cheek against the soul and having a mixed expression of deep sadness and a desperate desire to stay happy. Shame that to finally get some peace. She looked at the moss-turned ruins. All of this had to be done. Ryung nodded and calmly explained. It's okay, you just tried to protect what you love, and I know it's horrible, but do you really think the state of the city was salvageable? With dying trees, lifeless population and bleakness being so blatantly presented. Look around now, more green areas than you could ever hope to cultivate and recover even if they moved out willingly. How about you treat all of this massive, green land as one gigantic park around which you'll rebuild the city, The giantess noticed that she's slowly winning over the Mar's heart, so she added in reassurance, and should that greedy company ever come and try to build their power plants again. I'd be happy to help you out. The Mar opened her eyes a little as one small detail seemed to fly over her head through this entire conversation. Wait, you knew about Pol Lution? Ryung raised her eyebrow and pouted, crossing her arms. Oh, come on, I do my research. I am not doing this for fun. She whispered the next sentence. Well, maybe sometimes I do, since it's a lot of fun, but no one gets hurt. The Mar laughed out and nodded, agreeing to Ryung's conditions. You're right. We are many, and with such abundance of nature and greenery, free from the poisonous air, we should be able to regain our strength. The ring city idea with park as its centerpiece. I like that. Do you mind if we raised a statue in your name? Ryung blushed. Please don't do that. Mar noticed that and smiled. Aw, flustered aren't we? To which the giantess briefly pressed her saws together and rubbed them, revealing Mar again, stretching and giggling. Okay, but serious topics aside. Listen up, people. Before I go, is there anyone who'd like to get off my feet before I start playing around until I depart? She could see few hands raising and waving in. Ryung gently peeled them off and set them on the ground. She was surprised to see Mar still on her soul. Oh? Miss Mar, you don't want to go? To which she shook her head. Not really. If that's one way I can repay you for your help, I'll gladly stay around until you leave. The giantess nodded happily, and after seeing that her stalls are still full of people, many of them with smiles and some still afraid of her. Whether they wanted to stay of their own volition or due to having some sense of debt like Mar, all that mattered is that they decided to stay. With that, she decided to play around with people at her feet, placing her hand behind her and changing her position to sitting with a support so she could move both of her feet much more freely, sandwiching the tiny people between her stalls, increasing pressure, rubbing back and forth, squeezing some of them beneath her toes, shaking the foot and making some of the people fall onto the ground right before the giant foot came crashing down onto them. Ryung deeply enjoyed the feeling of their little bodies scattered all over her massive stalls, a perfect moment of relaxation and enjoyment after a job well done. The Mar, along with myriad of other tiny people, observed as the stalls close in on them, enveloping them in complete darkness, surrounded by sweaty, humid air and steamy heat. As the giantess rubbed her feet back and forth and increased the pressure of the soul sandwich, it almost seemed as, thanks to the combination of people on both sides, every single spot on the massive stalls is covered, being pressed deeper into the ridges, slightly foamed into the softness, and the intoxicating air definitely helped in calming them down and enjoying their predicament. They were utterly overwhelmed by the size of Ryung's bare feet. Awe and joy washed over the tinies as they were handled between and under her gently glistening soles. Due to the rubbing, Mar found herself under Ryung's big toe and then squeeze. For a brief moment it felt rough, but then it was almost as if a heavy, soft blanket enveloped her from all sides and refused to let go. She was also one of the people who was shook down to the ground. Upon the initial confusion and turning on her back, she was faced with the incoming soul that squished her and countless others into a shallow footprint. After a few minutes of innocent playing, Ryung called out to the people, "Okay, hold on now." The tinies grabbed what they could, slightly tickling the giantess. They felt as she moves her feet to a more stable ground and gently scrapes them off her feet as she stood up with a smile, looking down at the Mar. You all have a lot to do. Forgive me that I can't help more. There may be many others that require my help, but hopefully you're all heading towards a brighter future. And remember, I'll be back if needed. Mar dusted herself off, still basking a little in the heat and scent as she nodded. Thank you. I will definitely think twice before letting any company do as they please and cornering me into such a horrible situation. You're always welcome to visit, but please try to not cause too much chaos next time, she asked with a smile. Ryung giggled. I'll do my best. Goodbye. She made few steps forward, looking at the rooftop she left the art student on and waving to him as well. Soon enough, the giantess disappeared just as swiftly as she has appeared, leaving the Mar and her citizens free from the Pol Lution company, but with plethora of work on their hands. But finally there was reason for hope again, and Ms. Mar and many others were grateful for that. And of course also for the unique and crazy experience they were able to have today. The end. This was Rules of Nature, written by Elusive Sparrow. Link to the original story is in the description below. Mega Ryung is an original character from Cormany Media. Thank you for listening to this completely crazy story. We hope you enjoyed it. If so, give us a thumbs up and check out our Patreon page. Thank you.